Good. I'm going to call the city council work session to order with roll call.
Mayor Van Gordon,
Here.
Councillor Pitts, Councillor Moe,
Here.
Councillor Rodley,
Here.
Councillor Stair,
Here.
Councillor Woodrow,
Here.
and Councillor Pictionary.
I'm here. Thank you.
Have we heard from Councillor Pitts yet? No. Okay, while we start the first item, I will text him. We have two items tonight in the work session. We have transportation funding prioritization with Emma Newman. So if you are ready to go, Emma, we are ready to go.
I am. Good evening. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mayor and Councilors. I'm Emma Newman, the Senior Transportation Planner at the city. And before you this evening is our request to prioritize projects for the city of Springfield to apply for regional transportation grant funding. So the Central Lane Metropolitan Planning Organization has a grant funding opportunity every several years. The federal funds flow to the MPO, and then the cities and other jurisdictions and agencies in our metropolitan area can apply for those funds. In this cycle, we are looking at the next handful of years. It could be out to 2026. It could potentially be as far out as 2027. If we went out to 2026, Springfield might anticipate to receive about $3 to $6 million in transportation project funds. So staff have provided in the packet tonight a list of different options. Attachment 1 is for background information, funding timeline information. It also includes the principles for the funding approach and the project descriptions for the projects before you this evening. Attachment 2 provides two lists. The first of the lists is staff recommending those projects for funding. The second list is a list that staff is seeking council prioritization on the remainder of the anticipated funds. So the question before you this evening is, which projects should the city of Springfield submit funding applications for? And of those projects, what is the sequence of priority? I will note that Mayor Van Gordon and Councillor Moe are the City of Springfield representatives on the Metropolitan Policy Committee, which is the regional decision-making body that will be ultimately allocating these funds to projects across the region. And with that, I would like to just note one slight change. The recommended action is to recommend funding for Laura Street, Franklin Boulevard, Oregon 225, and transportation system plan updates, and then provide direction on projects for the options to prioritize list in attachment 2. And I can share that on the screen if that would be helpful during your discussion. One thing that I did want to note since the packet was distributed is that there has been some regional discussion around the expansion of bike share into Springfield. And this is currently shown on your list for other, in attachment 3, seeking other funding. But given that the STIF, the Statewide Transportation Improvement Funds grant cycle, isn't until later this fall, it would probably make sense to consider this MPO funding as well as a plan for bike share if that is something that council would like to provide funding for, to fill that funding gap that we discussed earlier this year. And so that is the final item on the seeking other funding list. That should be considered in the attachment 2 options to prioritize list. And with that, I'll turn it over and happy to answer any questions or provide the lists on the screen and be able to move things up and down or change dollar amounts if that is helpful. Yeah, and before I open it up, could you make a clarification on Franklin? It's on there a couple of different times. Is OR 225, is that the McVeigh portion or is that the traditional Franklin portion? Correct. It is the southern leg from the intersection with the roundabouts to the south. Okay, great. Thank you. Marilee?
I don't know where this comes in, but I'm going to say it now and get it over with. I even wrote down what I wanted to say because it's very important. I don't know what mechanics is necessary or even if it's possible, but sometimes I feel like Ward 5 is like an island. It's neglected. It's not thought about with what kind of needs it might have. There's so much attention that's paid to Mohawk and downtown and Glenwood and Gateway that, does Ward 5 exist? I mean, I kind of sometimes wonder. And I think it needs to be recognized because there are some transportation issues there and some needs. There's two of them in specific that I think about, and one is 52nd and G, coming off of 126, going into the dog leg, that then reaches that then extends on into a commercial area as well as a neighborhood area. Not only does it need help because it's going to get more congested, inevitably it's going to be more congested and more congested sooner than later. And the other part of it is that the wayfinding in that area is terrible, because if anybody goes off to 120, gets off at the 52nd exit on 126 and doesn't know exactly where they need to go, thinking that they might get to Main Street, you've got to do a whole bunch of block jumping in order to get there. So it's definitely an issue that I think has been there for a while, and I think it's only going to get worse with more people and more congestion. And my second part is 54th Street itself. I know that in the past, 54th Street has not been looked at for improvements because they expect that the residents on that street need to contribute to the improvements on the street. And I'm saying that when we are in a time frame of where we're getting money to help out, we have residents in that neighborhood that actually should be given credit, because we haven't had any major accidents. But if you look at the overview from up above, and you look at the streets in that neighborhood, 54th Street is the narrowest of the whole group, of the whole neighborhood in there, with deep ditches on either side and a pothole littered street to boot. And I just think that we could step up somehow. We're looking at other areas where we're helping folks out. And I just think we could step up somehow and maybe find a way to alleviate the situation that those folks have on 54th Street. And that's just two things. Like I said, it's not in the list. Ward 5 seems to get ignored. And so I'm just bringing that up.
All right. Emma, I don't know if you have any information about those two potential projects before I call on anybody else.
I will share that in staff discussions, we were talking about 48th Street north of Main. There is some development happening in that area. I am not the best person to speak to the specifics, but there should be some frontage and street improvements along a portion of the corridor that Councilor Woodrow was speaking to. So I mean, that's something we can follow up with more information about if you'd like.
That's great, except that I'm more concerned about 52nd and G and 54th Street. Those just they need to be looked at. And I'm not going to have many chances left to speak up for them. So I'm going to take a hold of that like I took a hold of Mill Street. So
your comments are valid. I hear you, and I have captured that. Thank you so much for speaking up.
Corey.
Thank you. Okay, so when I looked over all of these, I realized that I'm just one voice. And so you'll probably hear all of us have different opinions about things. But one of the things that I would love if I was in charge of the world, if we leaned into really hard, is the pedestrian crossing enhancements and the sidewalk repair and maintenance. Especially with this sort of lens on getting the walking routes ADA compliant. And I know that that's like a never ending task because, you know, regulations change, but I just think it would be just a great overall enhancement citywide. And so those were some of the ones for me. Also, the Mohawk Boulevard, since we've already are working on the upgrades from the last levy, which I think are making a huge difference. And I was looking at this around the 28th Street, the Main Street up to Olympic. And I'm also very supportive of that because that's just an increasingly growing artery. And I've mentioned this before and it's not on here. And so the 28th Street itself, all the way up to the intersection at Marcola Road, because with the Marcola Meadows and all the development that's going on there, I know that it's probably maybe on somebody's list somewhere, but just 28th Street all the way up and through, I think is just an area that needs attention. So that's where I'm starting. Thank you.
Okay, Leonard.
Thanks. So, for entirely selfish reasons, I'm glad to see Laura Street on the top. But I think anybody who saw Laura Street in its current state of repair would have a hard time arguing that it needs attention. But I am going to side with Councillor Rodley in favor of some of the more heavily trafficked areas. I think Mohawk is immensely important to get some attention right now. It's pretty broken down. Pioneer, the pedestrian crossing right now is pretty confusing, and I can see how people might get run over. I would also like to get some kind of attention to this 14th Street bikeway on Glenwood to Mississippi. And I would, let me see, there was one other thing that I wanted to bring attention to. Centennial and Gateway, both heavily trafficked right now. So safety upgrades on Centennial and Gateway. If not, is that, Emma, is that just a repave or is it safety updates? Is that just crosswalks or what?
So the list that you're referring to for the safety upgrades and the bikeway for 14th and Glenwood are projects that we're seeking funding through the state's All Roads Transportation Safety Project. They are not part of what we're asking you to prioritize this evening, but we are hopeful that we'll hopefully get some money from the state to address those. For the safety upgrades, it is installing lead pedestrian intervals. So that's making the pedestrians more visible at the intersections. And it would be doing other intersection changes to improve safety. So it does not have any paving that I'm aware of. It's more signal intersection safety improvements. Got it. Okay. And to drag this back from the other night, I'd like to have the bike share reconsidered as well. That's pretty much what I got right now. Thanks.
So Emma, when we look at attachment to page 2 of 2, right, what you need from us is we have between $1.5 million and $4.5 million of money, and there's $10 million of options, and you need us to tell you what goes on the top of that list. Correct. That is the sheet. Attachment 2, page 2 of 2 is really where we're seeking your input this evening.
Okay. Well, in that case, let me just go back to Mohawk and the pedestrian crossing and enhancements, along with the, 32nd and Jasper is certainly a problem area as well. Marilee?
Those were my 3. The pedestrian crossing enhancements, the 32nd and Jasper, the pavement preservation, and Mohawk. Those are the 3 that I had picked out for, I think that comes to $4.5 million.
Okay. Steve.
Pavement pedestrian crossing information. This is really hard to see. And pavement preservation project is really important to keep that, try and keep everything up as much as we can. So those are the 2 I have right now. Actually, he mentioned the bike share, which isn't on this list, but pretty important considering the future right now.
Yeah. So again, the sheet that we're working off of is the page 2 of 2, right? So it's not like we could pull something off and put something back on, but like the bike share, we're pursuing other funding with.
That is the intent, but if you want to see the city seek funds and make that happen, it would probably make sense to apply for funds in this grant opportunity as well as the other grant opportunity, just to make sure that we have a solid backup plan if the other grant opportunity does not come through. So it's that list on page 2 of 2 with the addition of bike share being added to that list for consideration.
So Emma, when we talk about Mohawk from 19th to the expressway, does that include the intersection? I read that as including the intersection based on that price tag.
No, it is doing from the ODOT jurisdiction down to the the south side of the intersection. It does not include the intersection itself.
Wow. Like I was surprised that was $1.5 million. Looking at the price tag, I thought it was going to go through the intersection. Okay. Jill.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thanks, Emma, for putting this together. I support the pedestrian crossing enhancements. I also support the preservation projects over on 32nd Jasper. I would not like to see the bike share compete with this list. I think if we go with a bike share, then it should be on its own and we can look at it as a separate project. I don't see how it mixes with this at all. I do though, I think though and I have to concur with Councilor Rodley for sure on the sidewalk repair and maintenance program. That is really important. I want to have people to have some safe mobility. I want people that want to get out and walk, not trip over sidewalks that are ankle busters. I want people that are in wheelchairs to be able to negotiate sidewalks without getting tipped over or damage their equipment. So I'd like to be able to see that sidewalk repair and maintenance programs stay in there, and also to I looked at the material. And that's a program I think we can approach. I know that the city will require, or currently requires, property owners to pay wholly for any sidewalk repair that's adjacent or abutting to their property. But I think there's a happy medium. I don't think the city should take the entire burden on, but I think that they can partner with some of the homes. I think it would be a right step in that program, or in that direction would be, you look at the property owners, et cetera, and if it's a lower income property, or they can show some financial where they're at financially, and they don't have the funds, et cetera, that I would be okay with helping to support those homes or those property owners. But I think sidewalks are probably the most underserved portion of our city, and I would really like to see that get going again. I think if I recall, the city of Eugene has a program that they have crews that do that, but they also charge for their service. I just think that there's many cities out there that have a myriad of different types of sidewalk repair programs, and I would like to see some energy put forth and in that area, and some options brought before us or back to us and saying, this is what we found, this is what we can do, and this is how many miles of sidewalk we think we can handle based on each of those options. So.
Okay. So right now I'm seeing where people are settling around pedestrian, South 32nd, Mohawk, and sidewalks. And the math that I have, it would be that's 6 million. So we need to do two things. One of them is we can give Emma 4 things. We just need to give it in an order of priorities. So I'm definitely hearing people definitely want a lot of interest in the pedestrian is the number. The pedestrian crossing enhancements is number 1. I'm looking around.
That'd be mine too, Sean.
Yeah. Okay. And then I'm hearing South 32nd is number 2.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that.
So do we want to put the sidewalks or the Mohawk 19th to OR Expressway or to 126 is 3?
Sean, I'm thinking too, you get more bang for your buck with the sidewalks. I think we got such a short run with the street on Mohawk that we should go for the intersection next time.
Yeah, I want to agree with Councilor Pictionary on this, because once I also assume that the intersection was in there, and if there's a way for us to add the intersection into that and put that, a bigger project. So yeah, my third would be the sidewalk repair.
Okay, so yes. I have pedestrian, 32nd Street, sidewalks, and then if we somehow come up with more money than Mohawk on top of that. And I think there's interest from a transportation perspective. At some point, we're going to talk about a bond again. That Mohawk, piece, I would expect to come back in a bond conversation for street bond round 2. Leonard.
All I wanted to say about Mohawk is that there are a lot of people who drive up and down Mohawk every day, and their cars are sustaining a lot of damage to their suspension systems as a result of the state of that road.
Well, it's
not the new Mohawk, because the new Mohawk is fantastic, but a little bit further north.
Yeah. The part that this is talking about is in disrepair, but the one that the street bond completed is really smooth.
Right. Yeah. No, near 126 is in good shape.
Yeah, and I did want to, actually, I was on Mohawk a couple different times today, and I can tell you that I am super happy with how that project turned out and how they went through. I also saw some trees have been planted, and they are actually doing a great irrigation system for those trees so they don't die and shrivel up. So I can't commend staff enough for that project. I know it's a little off base on this presentation, but it came up and I wanted to make sure that someone made note of that. And Steve, I agree completely with what you're talking about. Our pavement preservation is got to be a high priority. And I think that with the mayor talking about the street bond levy, that I think it'd be an easier sell to fix Mohawk than it would be to convince people for a street bond measure to fix sidewalks. So I think while we have the money for the sidewalks now, let's do that.
I think you're right. I agree with that.
Yeah, okay. Emma, did you need anything else from
The
us?
one piece that I'm not clear on was that I heard support from Councilor Stair and Mo for adding bike share, and Councilor Pictionary said to fund it with other funds. So I'm not sure at this point if we would submit an application for that or not.
I am hearing, I think we want to continue to look for other funds for that.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
I think we have to push bike share and maybe not here, but we need to keep it on the forefront.
Hey, Emma, before we let you go, could you talk to us a little bit about attachment 3, the already funded 46 million? I mean, I think that's a good, right? We talk about infrastructure all the time, and there is a lot of stuff coming down the queue, and there's a lot of good news in that list.
Yes, so this shows some of our past successes, projects that are funded but are not yet constructed. Oh, Christy's here joining. She's your next agenda item, but she is the expert in speaking to the capital project funding. So this is just an example of what the city currently has kind of in the pipeline for transportation projects that are already funded. If you have any specific questions, be happy to answer those, or anything that you'd like to hear further about this list beyond we've been successful and we have a lot of work to deliver.
I would just, yeah, there is a lot there. There's a lot of work going on. I would call out Mill Street to folks. I know that is something that is all a high interest to this council to make sure that it gets done. But to have $46 million that we've committed to the infrastructure system in the city is a pretty amazing feat. All right, any other questions before we let Emma go? All right, thank you very much, Emma.
Thank you.
All right, item number 2 is a Mill Street update with Christy.
Hello, Mayor and Council.
Hello.
I did hear you discuss Councilor Woodrow 52nd and 54th Street, and I received word from operations that they are, those are behind the scenes. They are working on that. So I'm sure Ben Gibson will give the council an update in the future on that one.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. So I'm here tonight to give an update on the Mill Street reconstruction project. On February 1st, we finally received the notice to proceed to start our design on Mill Street after quite a long time. So we're very excited about it. We received the notice to proceed because it is partially federally funded. So project elements that we are planning on including for the project are a full reconstruction from South A Street all the way up to Centennial, a complete reconstruction of the wastewater sewer line from Main Street to just north of G Street, and then also lining the laterals off of that line. Pedestrian and ADA improvements, bicycle facility improvements. We don't have a bike facility at all on Mill Street, and so we will need to include that as part of this. Also stormwater treatment and decorative lighting from Main to E Street, and possibly some traffic calming as well. I believe I got all of the elements so far. And then, do you have a question, Councilor Woodrow?
I was curious if there were any pedestrian crossings at all considered from Mill Street.
Yes, so we have been, I'll get more to some of the details of what we've looked at, but we know that there are some speeding and pedestrian crossing issues. And so we're definitely looking at that at the park, especially where there's the apartments on the west side and then the park on the east side. So
Right.
we're definitely looking at ways to look at traffic calming and pedestrian crossing safety.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem. So we set up a project webpage, which is on our current construction project website. And that website shows all of our projects that we are working on, whether it's in construction, design, or if we've completed the project. So that's something that I want to keep letting folks know about. And we keep it up to date quite often. So we sent out our first mailer, and that introduced folks, the property owners and residents and tenants, about the project elements, and also let them know that the survey workers were going to be out there. So right now we've completed the survey work, and we also did some geotech work. We did some coring to identify what we have out there so that we can take a look at the soils, and that'll show us that'll help us in our design for the pavement structure. So due to the limited right-of-way and all of the competing interests out there, and we do not have a bike facility, we do need to remove parking from one side of the street or the other. We touched on that previously when we were talking about West D Street, and knowing that this would come for Mill Street. So what I would like to do is send out our second mailer this week to those property owners and residents, giving them an update on the project, and then communicating that we do need to remove parking from one side or the other, and offering myself to meet them one-on-one if they would like, or if they'd like to send me questions, comments, concerns, speak with me on the phone, whatever they would like. So then we would take a look at that, see if there's anything, what concerns there are out there, if there's a theme with one side or the other, and then take a look at different cross-section ideas and go from there. So that's the thought right now. And so if you have any questions or comments.
And Christy, I have a question about the email list. So
Sure.
this is a separate specific email list that if people are interested, they can sign up specifically for Mill Street, right? Or is it just the generic update list that comes out of Public Works?
No, so what we've done for Mill Street specifically is we've sent out our snail mailers to a big area out there. And so not only will we send that out again, but we will also show the link so that they can sign up for email updates. We will also send email updates, this particular email update, to the 21 folks that have communicated with us with their emails. But we want to really duplicate everything so that we get as many people as possible.
Okay. Jill?
Yes, thank you. Along those lines, Christy, I was just thinking that, social media is pretty heavy in that area of town. And I'm thinking, I know we have obviously Springfield Facebook, but there's several different Facebook groups that would be directly affected by this, or at least be interested in this.
Okay.
And I know we don't typically go on to other Facebook groups, et cetera, but those are open groups. And I think that if we can jump on some of those and go ahead and just put it out there on those type of Facebook pages. So I just don't want to see, again, my trepidation in regards to parking, and I'm going to be quiet about that in that sense, because you got to do what you got to do. And from what I heard from explanation, we got to eliminate half the parking there just to get the federal funding to do the project. So that being said, I think that would be an important add-on to that information, is that you tell folks this isn't something that the reduction of the parking is not something that blame the city of Springfield on. It's something that it's mandated in order to have the funding just to fix the street. And it's a federal rule, as you explained to me, that it's required. But I think that just flood it, and as long as people get sick of that, that's fine. But I don't want to get people all fired up and saying, "Oh my gosh, we never heard a word." And then anything you do and everything you do, document that. And even if it comes down to door to door all the way down that street, I've done door to door before, and it seems like a lot, and it is a lot, but it's not a huge section of the city, and it would almost be worth saying door to door and document responses. But I'm excited for the project. I think it'd be great for the city to do, and it'd be a great add-on because it's a great connector from north to south. So anyway, that's my 2 bits.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions about Mill Street?
I think communication with everybody there as much as we can, because when we get to the end of some hearings, I really don't like it when somebody comes in here and says, I've never heard of this before. So let's try and do the best we can so that doesn't happen.
The good news is I think the community is very much behind getting Mill Street fixed. Christy, could you talk to us a little bit about sort of next steps? When are we going to hear about this next? What's coming up in the fall?
So we'll first, send this out, of course, and give it some time for any feedback that we do receive. And in the meantime, we're doing design work in terms of, pavement structure, taking a look at the utility facilities that are out there and what constraints do we have, what can we work with a design, some different design options. So there are still preliminary things that we're working on before we come up with a cross section or a number of cross sections. So we'll take a look at those and then develop a cross section or 2, and then come back with our first round of options.
Great.
And we do, in order to, the whole goal is to go out for construction at the beginning of 2024. So I'm really trying to get as much information from the public and design and, do all of our due diligence in a timely manner. But I also we definitely need to listen to the public. So it's, a balancing act.
Yep. Perfect. All right. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much, Christy, for the update. This is our last item for the work session. I'm going to adjourn us until 7 o'clock, and then we will be back here for the regular session. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
I
need to
don't
wear
know
a
why
fire
I don't
helmet.
have an EFS hat. Somebody needs to get me one.
Those fellows are crying out there.
For a badge. I would wear a badge.
All right. I think we are ready to go. I'm going to call the regular session of the Springfield City Council to order with roll call.
Mayor Van Gordon,
Here.
Councilor Pitts, Councilor Moe.
Here.
Councilor Rodley,
Here.
Councilor Stair,
Here.
Councilor Woodrow,
Here.
and Councilor Pictionary.
I'm here. Thank you.
And Councilor Pitts is excused for the evening. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As we begin our meeting tonight, I would like to ask members of the audience who are joining us by phone or online to please keep yourselves on mute until you are called on to provide public testimony. There are 2 times designated for public testimony this evening under public hearings and business from the audience. If you are attending in person, please complete the request to speak card located at the entrance of the council chambers and give them to the city recorder. If you're joining us online with a tablet, smartphone, or computer and wish to speak at either of those times, please raise your hand using the feature in Zoom. The order of the public testimony is as follows. Anyone in the council chambers, and then anyone who's raised their virtual hand. Neil, can you let us know how many people are joining us tonight?
Mayor, we have 30 participants online and approximately 15 in the council chambers.
Perfect. First item, please.
First item is Springfield Upbeat. You have 3 items under the Upbeat tonight. The first item is Mayor's Recognition Building Safety Month Proclamation.
I have to make sure I get the right proclamation. There's so many great things happening at the city right now. We got a lot of stuff to recognize. Whereas our city of Springfield, Oregon is committed and recognizing that our growth and strength depend on the safety and essential role of our homes, buildings, infrastructure in everyday life and when disasters strike. And whereas our confidence in the resilience of these buildings that make up our community is achieved through the devotion of guardians, building safety, fire prevention officials, architects, engineers, builders, tradespeople, design professionals, laborers, plumbers, and others in the construction industry who work year-round to ensure the safe construction of buildings. And whereas modern building codes include safeguards to protect the public from hazards such as hurricanes, snowstorms, tornadoes, wildland fires, floods, earthquakes, and whereas the Building Safety Month is sponsored by the International Code Council to remind the public about the critical role of our community's largely unknown protectors of public safety, our local code officials who assure us of safe, sustainable, and affordable buildings that are essential to prosperity. Whereas the safety for all building codes in action is the theme of the Building Safety Month 2022, encourages us all to raise awareness about the planning for safety and sustainable construction, career opportunities in building safety, and understanding disaster mitigation, energy conservation, and creating a safe and abundant water supply to the benefit of all. And whereas each year, in observance of the Building Safety Month, people all over the world are asked to consider their commitment to improving building safety, resilience, economic investment at home and in the community, and to acknowledge the essential services provided to us all by state and local building departments, fire prevention bureaus, and federal agencies. I, Sean Van Gordon, Mayor of Springfield, do hereby proclaim the month of May 2022 as Building Safety Month, and I encourage our citizens to join as we participate in Building Safety Month activities. And do we have somebody to, oh, come on down, Tom Boyette. The next one's Emergency Services Week proclamation.
Correct.
Okay. And I wanted to note one quick thing, all right, at least 2 quick things before this, that last week the fire department couldn't make it to the Eugene Emergency Service proclamation, but they did choose to come to the Springfield one, proving ultimately that it really is the Springfield Eugene Fire Department. Whereas emergency medical services are a vital public series, and whereas the members of the emergency medical services team are ready to provide life-saving care to those in need 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and whereas access to quality emergency care dramatically improve the survival and recovery rate of those who've experienced sudden illness and injury, and whereas the emergency medical services system consists of first responders, emergency medical technicians, paramedics, emergency medical dispatchers, firefighters, police officers, educators, administrators, emergency nurses, trained members of the public, and other out-of-hospital medical providers. And whereas the emergency services medical teams, whether career or volunteer, engage in thousands of hours in specialized training and continuing education to enhance their life-saving skills. Whereas it is appropriate to recognize the value and accomplishments of emergency medical services by designating Emergency Medical Service Week. I, Sean Van Gordon, the mayor of Springfield, do hereby proclaim May 15th through 21st, 2022, Emergency Medical Services Week in Springfield, and encourage the community to observe this week with appropriate programs, ceremonies, and activities. I don't know if anybody's got comments about emergency services. The one thing that I always want to point out is, especially when we see folks coming out of public safety, we really do appreciate what you guys do. These are really opportunities to recognize all the different commitments from the public safety field, and we don't get a chance to talk to you guys enough. And so thank you very much. Leonard.
Yeah, I wanted to just chime in too. We represent police, and it's always brought home to me that you go out and put yourself into dangerous situations for a 2-hour guarantee, and we don't take it lightly, and we appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Nerly.
Yes, I got quite an education when I did a ride along with the ambulance for almost a whole shift. And I can't begin to tell you, they deserve all the credit that anybody can give them, because they are out there on the line helping people and working with people through their whole shifts and cooperating with each other at the same time. So we couldn't ask for a better emergency service than we've got.
I don't know that I can say anything that hasn't already been said except for ditto. And I have such deep, deep appreciation for our emergency services and first responders. Thank you all for being here, and please just share our appreciation with the team.
Joe.
Thank you. No, I'm sure I can't add too much except for that. I just wanted to say that the firefighters, the paramedics, the police officers, the safety net that all of you represent to our citizens, the hospital workers, all those the medical folks that we have here in Springfield. Without you, we would be in a big heap of trouble, big time. And that you all go along every day, all day, and go about your business, and you're not jumping up and down and saying, "Look at me." So you all humble me very much, and I appreciate every single one of you. And it's well-deserved proclamation. Thank you.
All right, let's do the photo op. Come on, guys.
Yeah.
You see,
They
take the picture and walk away.
Yeah, you don't know when it's going.
Oh, okay.
We're missing the chief in that picture. We're missing the chief in that picture, Tom.
Oh, he means the PD chief. Guys, get it?
Thank you very much.
All right. National Public Week proclamation. So whereas the development and public works professionals focus on infrastructure, facilities, emergency management, and services that are of vital importance to sustainable and resilient communities and to public health, high quality life, and well-being of the people of Springfield. Whereas it is in the public's interest for citizens, civic leaders, and children in Springfield to gain the knowledge and maintain ongoing interest and understanding of the importance of development in public works, first responders, and public works programs in their respective communities. And whereas the year 2022 marks the 62nd annual National Public Works Week sponsored by the American Public Works Association. Now, I, Mayor Sean Van Gordon, do hereby designate the week of May 15th through 21st 2022 as National Public Works Week. And I urge all community members to join with representatives of the American Public Works Association and government agencies to pay tribute to our development and public works professionals, engineers, managers, and employees, and to recognize their substantial contributions that they make to protecting our community's health, safety, and quality of life. All right. And who's coming up for, well, Corey brought the hat, so we got to give her a chance to chime in here.
And I know that the public works folks know that they are my people. I just, and I think I might have said this before, but so much of what we do as a city is about the facilities and the infrastructure and the services. And just when we talk about the livability of Springfield, we are talking about the work of our folks who work in public works and development and public works for the city of Springfield. So thank you for your tireless year-round effort doing sometimes hard and icky things.
And I think that sums it up very well, right? Like public works is a place, again, that we oftentimes, we don't get in front of you guys enough to just say, hey, thank you, right? Everything that is in the city that works day to day, you guys contribute to, and it's appreciated. Leonard.
Yeah, we represent public works employees too, and talk about a frontline job. Oh my goodness. I mean, just like having to plug a main that's burst in the middle of the night and in freezing temperatures. We've had several people out on the coast almost drown in mud, which is drowning in water is bad enough, but the amount of risk that public works employees go through in the normal course of duty isn't really appreciated enough. So thanks a lot.
Joe.
Thank you. And I just want to relate a very recent story about a public works employee. And I just came across this, and it was very recent, as a woman had pleaded out in social media that she has lost her wallet, and that there was obviously some financial issues and IDs and rent. She was devastated. And lo and behold, that evening, a person pulled up in a city of Springfield truck from Public Works, walked up to her door, knocked on her door and said, "Are you missing this?" Handed it to her. She got everything back. Nothing was missing at all. The person had already left before she can even get his name. That's what you call service, and that's what you call doing the right thing. That's incredible integrity. And that's what that's kind of folks we have here. And I just wanted to recognize that person. If I knew their name, I'd be throwing them under the bus right now, but I don't. So Public Works folks, if you hear about that, would you please extend my personal thanks to that staff member who returned that to that person.
All right, let's take the picture.
All right.
Councilor Rodley, I was disappointed that you're not going to wear that through the entire meeting.
Could want to, could.
I did want to bring up one point before we go to the next item, and just to share with the rest of the council. I know that there were 2 mass shootings in the United States this last weekend, and I know that there's some interest among the council, since we have been through this as a community, and it is tragic, and our hearts obviously go out to the victims in the cities that go through this. I just wanted to let everybody know that I was going to be working with the staffs to make sure that as a community that we've reached out to those jurisdictions and just give them the support in this time of need.
We have had our mass shooting too. Thursday.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Mayor, the next item is the consent calendar.
Make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
See how easy it is.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar. Could you call the roll, Neil?
Yes, Counselor Pitts, Counselor Mo,
Yes.
Counselor Rodley,
Yes.
Counselor Stair,
Here, yes.
Counselor Woodrow,
Yes,
It's twice.
Counselor
I've done that.
Pictionary.
Yes, thank you.
The motion passes 5 yeses, 0 nos, and 1 absent. Next item, please.
Next item, you have 5 public hearings tonight. Public hearing number 1 is annexation of territory to the city of Springfield. Annex 1.77 acres of property located near the intersection of South 66th Place and Jessica Drive in Mountain Gate map 18-02-03-00, tax lot 302. This is ordinance number 2, an ordinance annexing certain territory located at the southeast edge of Mountain Gate Second Edition near South 66th Place and Jessica Drive to the city of Springfield and Willow Lane Park and Recreation District, adopting a severability clause and providing an effective date. This is a second reading, and Andy Limbert is here for the staff report.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and councilors. This is a continuation of a public hearing that was started on May 2nd. The reason for the continuance was to remedy public notification deficiencies. Staff placed another public hearing notice in the newspaper, reposted the site, and continued the public hearing to this evening to allow for any further comment. The staff did receive just prior to the prior meeting, which is included in your packet, a letter from the Fair Housing Council of Oregon requesting a deferral of the matter to a future time. Staff has reviewed and responded to that letter in your council report. Staff is of the view that there are no merits to the request to defer the action for 2 reasons. The first being that the site is not part of the city's original residential lands inventory. It was considered a developed site when that initial lands inventory was prepared in 2012, I believe. And secondly, the rezoning action does not change the residential use, zoning, and designation of the site in any event. So it doesn't have an impact on the amount of land zoned or designated for residential use. So neither of those factors influence the city's residential housing inventory, and therefore staff feels it's appropriate to consider the annexation and to dismiss the request by the Fair Housing Council to delay the matter. There were no other comments offered in the either the initial notification or the continuance. Staff is recommending to close the public hearing and to deliberate and consider adopting the ordinance to annex the site. I'd be happy to answer any of their questions that you have, but this is the recommendation of staff to proceed with the annexation.
Leonard.
Andy, typically when residents are resistant to an annexation, it has to do with their perception that their tax bill is going to go up. Is there anything that we can say to reassure them?
In this case, because it's an agency-owned annexation, there may be a change of taxation, although sub is tax exempt. It's interesting. It's funny that you raise that issue because people do ask about the effects in general, not this specific site, but in general, the effects of annexation on property value, on taxes. It's kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, the property immediately becomes more valuable because it is more developable. You don't have to set aside area for a septic system, as an example, which it consumes a significant amount of territory on a property. And so with the annexation and with the increased developability of property, there is a higher value associated with that, which leads to a higher taxable value that the county assessor would assign to the property. So it's it does have, in at least anecdotally, it does have the result of likely higher taxes, but because of the higher value and the way that the county assesses taxes on property. Again, the city not being the taxing authority, we go by what we see with information that's passed along to us kind of after the fact.
That clears it up. Thanks.
All right. The public hearing is already open, so I will take a moment, and I don't have any cards for this item. If you're wishing to add additional public testimony for this item, please raise your hand.
Mayor, it appears we have no hands for this item.
I will go ahead and close the public hearing on this item and see if there's any questions or there's a motion to adopt.
Make motion to adopt ordinance number 2.
Second.
It's been moved by Counselor Mo and seconded by Counselor Pictionary. Neil, could you call the roll, please?
Yes, Counselor Pitts, Counselor Mo,
Yes.
Counselor Rodley,
Yes.
Counselor Stair,
Aye.
Counselor Woodrow,
Yes,
and Counselor Pictionary.
Yes, thank you.
Motion passes, 5 yeses, 0 nos, and 1 absent. Next item, please.
Next item is public hearing number 2, annexation of territory to the city of Springfield, annex 0.41 acres of property located at 5423 Mount Vernon Road, assessors map 18-02-04-42, tax lot 800, and a portion of the Mount Vernon Road public right-of-way abutting the property. Again, this is ordinance number 3, an ordinance annexing certain territory addressed as 5423 Mount Vernon Road, assessors map 18-02-04-42, tax lot 800, and a portion of Mount Vernon Road public right-of-way abutting the subject property to the city of Springfield and Willamette Lane Park and Recreation District, withdrawing the same territory from the Willackenzie Rural Fire Protection District, adopting a severability clause and providing an effective date. This is a second reading, and Melissa Carino is here for the staff report.
Thank you, Neil. Good evening, Mayor and councilors. Similar to the previous annexation request, this is a continued public hearing from May 2nd due to not meeting all public notice requirements. To recap, the property owner of this site has requested that council consider an ordinance to annex an approximately 0.4 acre property municipally addressed as 5423 Mount Vernon Road in Springfield, along with a portion of the adjacent public right-of-way. The full proposed annexation area is highlighted in yellow, and since the public hearing on May 2nd, city staff have not received any additional public comments about this annexation request, and there are no additional changes or updates to the application. Just to recap as well, here's a diagram of the current zoning and city boundaries. The site is zoned community commercial with the urbanizable fringe overlay. Also, as a reminder, the staff report for this annexation request takes into consideration of future commercial development at the site, specifically in terms of the capacity and availability of key urban facilities and services. And this is a diagram of the proposed zoning and city boundaries if annexation is approved. No other zoning changes is requested except for the removal of the urbanizable fringe overlay. Because all applicable annexation criteria have been met and the annexation will help facilitate bringing this property and the budding right of way into city limits, city staff recommend that council closes the public hearing, hold deliberations, and make a decision on this request. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Okay, the public hearing is already open. I do not have any additional cards for this item. If somebody is joining us virtually and wants to speak to this item, please raise your hand.
Mayor, it appears we have no hands for this item.
I will close the public hearing. Counselor Mo,
Make a motion that we adopt ordinance number 3.
Second.
it's been moved by Counselor Mo and seconded by Counselor Pictionary. Neil, could you call the roll, please?
Yes, Counselor Pitts, Counselor Mo,
Yes.
Counselor Rodley,
Yes.
Counselor Stair,
Aye.
Counselor Woodrow,
yes,
and Counselor Pictionary.
Yes, thank you.
The motion passes 5 yes, 0 nos, and 1 excused. Next item, please.
Next item is your third public hearing, master fees and charges, a resolution number 2, a resolution adopting the master fees and charges schedule for fees, charges, rates, permits, and licenses as established by the Springfield Municipal Code, Fire Code, and Building Code. Sam Kelly Quattrochi is here for the staff report.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm just here with the public hearing request for master fees and charges, and then the resolution to adopt or not adopt. Before we open the public hearing or have any questions, I just want to point out just a couple of minor changes from my last saw you all. This resolution does include all of the stormwater and wastewater rates you saw from Catherine Bishop and Matt Stouter. All of the proposed Santa Pack changes. There is one quick change. There are some additional hospital acute care location pricing and non-acute, non-hospital location pricing for biomedical waste. These are not available at the time of the hearing or last meeting, but they're in this packet now. And then the sidewalk cafe permit fee has been reduced. It is only seeing the typical 5% increase, and then the reinspection fee has been removed. Over the next few weeks, you'll hear more about that program. And at that time, there's a chance to change those fees if you'd like to see fit.
Okay, hang on one second, Sam.
Sorry to interrupt, Sam. The Teamsters represent members at Santa Pac, so I'm recusing myself from this vote. Thanks.
Counselor.
All right, Sam, did you have anything else from a staff presentation?
Nope, those are the updates I wanted to highlight.
Okay. Any questions from the council? Oh, Councilor Pictionary.
Hello, I'm trying to orient my brain here. So is any of this package have to do with the fees that we discussed, I think just a while back in regards to the sidewalk food service thing where we were all freaking out over the cost of it and the increase? So does this one show that was reduced or it was back?
Correct.
So,
sorry.
Oh no. So if was it reduced per what our conversation was, or was it the original charges on this?
It has been reduced to the typical 5%, so it is now $72 per year, and then the reinspection fee, which was the $100 a year, that was removed.
Okay.
And so that's what we did for this one, yeah.
So this is what I would like to discuss before this is adopted, is that I have much more information that was provided to me in regards to that permit and why the jump and why the cost of it. And I got to tell you, fellow counselors, I am in support of what the staff recommended the first iteration when it went up to, I think, 200 or something like that. It makes complete sense to me now. I just did not have enough information at the time when I was supporting reducing that. I think it'd be very important that council gets that information before this is passed, or is this just a reading?
This is the adoption, and I'm happy to explain that. Also, unless you feel comfortable with Councilor Pictionary, please feel free. But if not, I've also been educated since that May 2nd meeting on that fee.
If it's okay, Sean, if we can provide that information to council, and that maybe we can make that change, that small edit before we pass this resolution.
Yeah, so Sam, would you provide us with kind of the backstory, and then we'll figure it out from there?
Yes,
Thank
and
you.
first,
Sorry.
Sorry, go. Thank you. I would like to apologize to council on my own lack of education on this fee. There's quite a few in there, and this is the one that I missed the opportunity beforehand. So this is currently an annual inspection fee. So it is $72 proposed every year. The $200 would have been every other year. So for 2 years, you pay $200, be good for 2 years. And then after that, it's $100 every 2 years. So it is correct in the first couple years, you pay more than you would at this current proposed rate. By about year 5, you start seeing savings for the permit owners. And from there on out, there are increased savings at $100 every 2 years, as opposed to $72 every year. That was the piece that was missing, both in the language of the fee itself and then the description of the entire process. You'll see, I think immediately after me is the first reading of the cafe sidewalk permits and the outdoor dining, and that will explain more of the work involved and why this is a bit more involved process, looking at the seating, the requirements. Yes, Councilor?
Yeah, so if we can, Christina, I don't want to get something passed and then turn right around and have to undo it. And if we can jump in on that and provide some guidance.
I understand that perspective completely. If I can just interrupt for a moment, Mayor and Council. Part of the reason for the expanded fee, as Sam mentioned, is the change in ordinance requirements that we're proposing. and going to a 2-year instead of a 1-year permit. However, based on the timing of when that ordinance would become effective, it actually would not be effective on July 1 when this master fees and charges takes effect. In addition, we're also proposing, which will be the next agenda item that Neil will talk about, a new license, which will also need a new fee. So one of the solutions is to adopt the master fees and charges schedule with this permit for the current, based on the current code. That would be in place for about a week before, but depending on your adoption timeline, a week, maybe longer if you don't adopt the changes before your summer recess. And then the new fee for the 2-year permit could be set at the same time as the new fee for the new license program that goes along with it. And so you would have consistency with the fee matching the ordinance when it takes effect. So there would be a little gap in time where you would have the old fee and then you would jump to the new fee, but you wouldn't be having to redo anything or take any extra process because you'll have to adopt a new fee anyway for the second part of that program.
So Christina, your recommendation would be adopt the master fees that we have in front of us today. And that when we get to the next item, that is actually going to correct the issue that Councilor Piscineri brought up.
Correct. When you're ready to, you'll do your first reading and public hearing on those code changes tonight. And then when you're ready to deliberate and adopt that ordinance, you'll have a resolution in front of you at that next meeting on those fees. And state law requires a public hearing then as well, just specific to those fees. And then all of this discussion will be very relevant at that point. So I would recommend you adopt with the current fee in place and then make this decision later. Although I understand the input about not wanting to adopt one thing and then 2 weeks later potentially do something different.
Thank you. That totally clears it up for me, Sean. And I, as usual, I maybe got the cart before the horse, but better now than later. So
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions before I open the public hearing? I'm going to open the public hearing. I have no cards for this item. Neil, do we have anybody on Zoom that is raising their hand?
Yes, Mayor, we have one hand raised. That speaker is Kelsey Moore. Kelsey, you should be able to unmute your microphone.
Great. Can you all hear me?
We can.
Great. Hi, counselors. My name is Kelsey Moore, and I just started a position with Lane Council of Governments as a transportation options specialist, and I'll be working primarily in Springfield. So I just wanted to drop in and introduce myself. I'll be working with, yeah.
Are you ready to speak on specifically to the fees and charges?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought this was the public, and like, this is not the time where folks can jump in.
No, we are going to put you in the queue. We're almost
Okay.
to the item, and then we'll have you back up.
Sounds perfect.
Do we have anybody else, Neil?
No other hands, Mayor.
I am going to close the public hearing.
Motion that we adopt resolution number 2.
Second.
Neil, could you call the vote, please?
Yes, Counselor Pitts, Counselor Mo,
Yes.
Counselor Rodley,
Yes.
Counselor Stair,
Abstain.
Counselor Woodrow,
Yes.
and Counselor Piscineri.
Yes, thank you.
Motion passes 4 yeses, 0 nos, and 1 absent and 1 abstained. Next item, please.
Mayor, the next item is the expand cafe and outdoor seating within downtown and mixed use districts. Ordinance number 4, an ordinance amending Springfield Municipal Code 7.900 through 7.908 downtown district sidewalk cafe permit and adding Springfield Municipal Code 7.910 through 7.918 open air dining. This is a first reading and this is my item. So good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm here tonight to talk about expanding cafe and outdoor seating within downtown and mixed use districts. And as I mentioned, this is a first reading. So as you know, during COVID-19, dining establishments were required to follow physical distancing and limits on their indoor capacity. These were necessary measures to protect public health, but the business community began to look for creative ways to comply while continuing to maintain their services. That's where the council came in and approved emergency regulations to meet these needs. And a number of downtown businesses were able to provide outdoor seating throughout the pandemic. So the state of emergency was terminated by the council on April 4th. And at that time, you expressed interest in adopting some long-term regulations for expanding cafe seating. So what we're bringing to you tonight is twofold, both a request to allow permanent expansion of cafe seating permits, which is in the right of way, and adding an entirely new code for open air dining licenses, and that would be on private property. So several staff members from DPW and CAO worked all through these items. A couple of them are here if we have some detailed questions, but I'll go over some of the changes. So starting with cafe seating, this ordinance proposes several things. One is to rename it Downtown District Outdoor Cafe Permit, changing that to the Downtown District Sidewalk Cafe Permit. And this will be to help business owners distinguish between the two types of permits we're asking you to provide. It also adds language to clarify the standards a permit must meet to show safe and responsible use of the right of way. And it gives the city manager or her designee the authority to authorize cafe areas in downtown that are not sidewalk on a case-by-case basis. So this, we recognize that generally the sidewalks are the best place and most appropriate use, but it does give us some flexibility in case there are some other options that we want to look at. Additionally, it adopts new language requiring permission from the real property owner of the restaurant in addition to the restaurant owner. It clarifies that a sketch of the sidewalk cafe has to be included so we can see the obstructions that might be in place and better help us identify any ADA accessibility issues or other safety concerns, and includes a requirement to provide engineering stamp drawings if the structure is hazard or storm or earthquake, if there are issues with that, because all of these items will be proposed in the right of way. Currently, cafe seating permits are valid for 1 year, and this hits on the issue we just talked about, and are required, business owners are required under the code to reapply annually. The changes proposed are to make it a 2-year permit, subject to separate renewal fee that council may set at a lower rate. A 2-year permit is recommended by staff, one, to reduce the cost to business owners, reduce the amount of work to re-inspect each year, but it will still require renewal often enough that city staff can identify any issues. So moving to the open air licenses, and if you have questions, just please let me know. Moving to the open air licenses, these are entirely new proposed code, and these would be for private property. So this code is different than downtown seating in 2 key ways. One, it allows outdoor dining in a parking lot or a building setback area on private property, similar to what you see at like Public House, as opposed to sidewalks and other public right of way. And it applies to any mixed use commercial or residential area with an existing restaurant. So we're expanding it past downtown. Kind of Mohawk area also has some similar areas. This section requires the license holder to maintain their open air dining in the approved configuration and get city approval for any changes. So we'll know if there's changes. And we've modeled these requirements on open air dining in private parking lots, which was recently adopted by the city of Beaverton as part of their post-pandemic permanent open air Beaverton program. The changes have been made to Beaverton standards, but of course reflect appropriate circumstances for Springfield. These operating standards would allow open air dining areas on any parking lot using at least 2 parking spaces or more if the property has surplus on-site parking. It allows open air dining next to the restaurant in a side yard or rear yard setbacks, except under certain circumstances. Allows for stormwater treatment or other the exceptions include where stormwater treatment would encroach upon adjacent residential uses, would be also allowed on property frontage. So open air dining licenses may include overhead structures much larger than what's allowed in kind of the smaller sidewalk areas you see now. So safety and design standards would be necessary. So 2 separate things we're bringing to you tonight. We did receive 1 comment from Colby Phillips and Patrick Campbell, owners of Public House, regarding some of the stormwater language. We'll get that email to you. We just received it before the meeting, and then we'll respond before the second reading.
Councilor Pictionary.
Thank you, Neil. Quick question, and I don't know if this has been addressed, but I am curious or wondering about a potential undue advantage in some circumstances, and just keep that in back of your mind. And then as far as seating is concerned, if you have an establishment that has very low cost, that has 10 seats inside, and then they're able to expand their business basically, or thereby increasing their square foot to having 30 seats outside. And then right next doors, you have a place, an eatery that has got 30 seats inside and is paying 3 times more square foot rent lease for their business and only has room for 10 seats outside. And so they're side by side. And then we've actually, I think we've kind of created a financial advantage over another business inadvertently. Or am I like, I mean, I'm just picturing that. And it seems like there, and I don't know if we have any limit as to what the indoor seating is compared to a ratio of outdoor seating. Has that been considered?
So Councilor Pictionary, I do not know if we've done that specific research, but we can do that.
It just seems that if I'm thinking about our downtown people or downtown businesses, and Planktown's got pretty good seating area, et cetera, and they can expand up, but I don't think they could more than double what they have inside. And then next doors or 2 doors down, you have a very small eatery, and they're getting the same advantage or more advantage if you're looking at it from a business perspective than a larger business that wants to do outdoor seating as well. Is that making any sense?
It does, and that would be up to the council to decide how they would want to move forward.
Do you have any more information on that? Maybe when we bring it back, we can answer that question. And Joe, I'm hearing you as just sort of asking the broad question about not a deep analysis, but simply simply like, hey, if we walk down Main Street, how do we actually manage those interfaces? And I see.
Yeah, and it's not, I'm not like saying, hey, let's look for a ratio here. What I'm saying is that we need to consider it so that way, if a business down the road, even if it's 6 months down the road, says, hey, how come they're paying, they only have to pay so much for their rent lease because they only have so many square feet, and yet they have the same amount or more seating than I've got to have available to me, and I'm paying 3 times the rent because my square footage is greater. I just want to be able to see that we looked at it and it's like, okay, we can't see that that's necessarily the case, or even query some of the businesses downtown to see if that would be a problem. I just would hate to revisit it based on some sort of grievance.
Nancy.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Pictionary, I think that is interesting question. I think it relies on a number of assumptions that staff may not be able to answer right now, but just for an example, we are in Oregon. Not everybody wants to be outside. Also, restaurants may have, it also depends on, does the restaurant have good service? They have good food. I mean, there's a lot of variability there. As an allergy sufferer, I never want to eat outside. So side note. But all of those to say is that we do have a downtown business meetup scheduled fairly soon, and we can broach this issue with our downtown businesses and just get their feedback during that meetup. I know I'm planning on attending, so I'll just make a note to pose your question there.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I'm not asking for a big deep dive. It's just that if it's predictable, it's preventable in the sense that if we got a business that is really upset about it, and now we find ourselves in a quandary by trying to backpedal or crawfish on it and find somebody that says, hey, I'm sorry, but grandfather rules. So I don't know. I just be able to get some opinion off them and get some buy-in from all the folks downtown.
Sure, no problem. We can do that.
Okay. Any other questions? Leonard?
So maybe down the line, the correct solution would be just to make some sort of ratio where you would have a certain number of seats for a certain amount of square footage in the business. I'm just sort of spitballing here.
Steve?
The downtown district sidewalk cafe permit only applies to downtown. Is there going to be any opportunities in, let's say, Thurston, Mohawk, or Gateway for somebody to need something like that?
So the second permit, the outdoor seating
Yeah.
does extend past downtown.
It does not.
It does.
Well, yeah, the second one does, but the first one doesn't. Downtown District Cafe permit does not extend outside downtown. The second one does. There's no
Correct.
here. The first one does not, right?
Correct.
What if there's a need out there for somebody for that kind of use? Like Gateway, Mohawk, or Thurston?
Yeah, well, we could see if we've received that information or any request. I think Christina might be able to answer this one better than me.
Christina.
Yeah, thank you. So I asked staff specifically when drafting this ordinance, whether during COVID, which was really the height of when this was needed because businesses were precluded from having any indoor seating at one point. And during COVID, there were no requests outside of downtown for seating in the right of way. Because outside of downtown, most locations have adequate room on their side of the property for outdoor dining. And so then that was determined based on applications that were seen for special COVID permits that cafe seating could be limited to downtown and there would be no hardship on how people were operating under COVID situations. But the open air dining, allowing that on private property, there were businesses in the Mohawk area that took advantage of that during COVID. And so by extending to mixed use zoning throughout the city, it would allow that to continue where it's been established in the Mohawk area, and then also would allow some expansion potentially for restaurants in other mixed use districts. Glenwood, if or when restaurants develop there in the mixed use zones, Gateway, where there's mixed use zoning in Gateway. Not all of Gateway is presently mixed use. And then other along Main Street, there's some scattered mixed use as well, although I don't know that it extends all the way out to Thurston. But council could also look at other zoning districts and including those. I think as my understanding from DPW staff was that as the areas where these could be established become more spread out and diverse, as opposed to concentrated specific areas, the enforcement resources become higher to make sure that these are operated in a safe manner and that there's sort of eyes on them by city staff to make sure people are being safe and they're not creating fire hazards with heaters or those types of things.
Yeah, I was just concerned that everybody's being treated the same. And who ever thought that at 0 degrees, people would be eating outside, very popular. Amazing.
All right, any other questions? Corey.
I don't have a question. I just have a comment. I appreciate when I read through it, I really appreciate the attention to just safety, because I know that was something that came up the last time we talked about it, about like, yes, we're very supportive of this as long as we're taking into account how people are using the sidewalks. And so I appreciated the detail of y'all going through that and trying to make sure there's room for people to walk and bike and all of the things. And I'm hoping, since this is a first reading, and if there are folks out there who have looked at this and have opinions about that in particular of interest to me, about how that reads and feels to you all in terms of just the shared use of that space, I would love to hear that. Thank you.
All right. Then I think we're going to go ahead and open the public hearing. I have no cards for this item. Neil, do we have anybody in the Zoom that wants to speak to this item?
No, it appears we have no hands for this item, Mayor.
Then I'm going to close the public hearing. This is no action, first reading only. Next item, please.
Okay, your next item is public hearing number 5, liquor license endorsements for the renewal period 2022 through 2023. And Tom Boyat is here for the staff report.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tom Boyat, Community Development Director, Development and Public Works. I'm here for Robin Holman, who manages our business licensing program, so that she didn't have to come out. This is your annual endorsement of the block of existing licenses that you have already provided. It's a step that we do in the process that just kind of pre-clears these from your level. We've checked with the police department. They have no concerns. As of 4 o'clock today, which was the cutoff, we didn't have any public comment on this item. So if there are any questions, I'll do my best to answer.
Are there any questions? All right, then I am going to open the public hearing. I have no cards for this item. Is there anybody online that wants to speak to this item?
Mayor, it appears we have no hands for this item.
I'm going to close the public hearing.
And I'll make a motion that we approve the liquor license listed on the attachment of the packet of materials, which I not on that page. So
Second.
Neil, could you call the vote, please?
Yes, Counselor Pitts, Counselor Mo,
yes,
Counselor Rodley,
Yes.
Counselor Stair,
Aye.
Counselor Woodrow,
Yes,
and Counselor Pictionary.
Yes, thank you.
A motion passes, 5 yeses, 0 nos, 1 absent. Next item, please.
Mayor, the next item is business from the audience.
I have no cards, so we can go directly to online testimony.
Yes. Our first speaker is Kelsey Moore, followed by Emma Newman. I'm sorry, just Kelsey Moore. And Kelsey, you should be able to unmute your microphone.
Okay, hello again. So again, I'm Kelsey Moore, working with Lane Council of Governments as a transportation options specialist. I just started there about a month ago. And my primary work will be supporting transportation options, active transportation, walking, biking, busing, rolling in Springfield. I'll be working closely with Emma Newman, the City of Springfield transportation planner, and be working on a couple of projects, including bike share, the potential bike share expansion, bike rack infrastructure install throughout Springfield, and fix-it stations and some bike safety education as well are some of the pieces that I'll be looking at. And I just wanted to introduce myself and say hello and let you all know that I'm here starting to do this work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, your next speaker is Emma Newman. And Emma, you should be able to unmute your microphone.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Neil. So thank you, Kelsey, for being here tonight and introducing yourself. This was in response to council's request when I brought forward the bike share item a couple months ago for your discussion. One of the follow-up actions was to introduce you to Kelsey. So we're doing that this evening, and I just want to shout out and say really, really grateful to have hired her. She's a very qualified candidate who I've had the pleasure of working with on transportation in the area for maybe almost a decade at this point. She's very enthusiastic about the job and also just jumping right in. She's already been partnering with the Peddler, which is one of the businesses that you wanted us to reach out to and be building partnerships with more, as well as the Springfield Library for May is Bike Month activities. So happy May, happy Bike Month, and there are events happening in our community because of Kelsey jumping in and in the first 2 weeks of the job, making partnerships and making things happen. So we're really excited to have her on board and look forward to what is yet to come.
And Mayor, it appears we have no other hands for business from the audience.
All right, any council response before we move on to the next item?
Kelsey Moore, welcome to Springfield. Please contact me. I'd like to know more about what you're doing and we work together. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'd just like to second that, Kelsey. I'm the liaison to LCOG, so please feel free to reach out to me as well. Thanks.
Okay, next item, please.
You have one ordinance tonight, and that is the Development Code Update Project. Ordinance number 5, an ordinance amending the Springfield Development Code related to middle housing and other residential uses, employment land uses, and application review and decision-making procedures, adopting a savings clause and a severability clause and providing an effective date. This is a second reading, and Mark Rust is here for the staff report.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm going to get just a second here to get, I'm going to share my screen if that's all right tonight. And it's my first time doing this both in person and remotely. And AJ, can I? Thanks for your patience. I'm going to turn my camera and make sure I'm muted, so you'll just hear me through the microphone here tonight. This will be interesting. Let's see. I'm gonna share my screen. Get to my PowerPoint. Thanks for your patience. I think that should do it. So we're here to talk a little bit more about the development code. Hopefully it's getting to the point where we'll be moving forward with implementing the new development code. And as you'll recall, I was last before you on April 25th for a joint public hearing with the Lane County Board of Commissioners. At that public hearing, the city council received testimony and closed the city council portion of the public hearing. The Board of County Commissioners did continue their public hearing due to a noticing flaw on their side. They continued their public hearing until May 3rd, which they held. I attended that meeting. No additional public testimony was provided to the board at their continued public hearing, and they closed their public hearing as well. Tonight, we're asking for the city council to deliberate and consider a motion to adopt the ordinance to amend the development code. However, there are a couple of items we're asking for your specific input and direction on that are laid out in the memo packet in front of you tonight. There are 2 points I do want to touch on that just want to make sure are part of the presentation. One is kind of a minor error in the diagrams that I presented you at the public hearing. Oh, and I'll just touch on this. The Planning Commission recommendation, we just wanted to be clear. I think in the packet that was for the public hearing included the recommendation from the Planning Commission. It did not include the handwritten in number of votes that were forwarded from the Planning Commission. We want to be clear, it was a 5-to-1 vote. There was one member of the Planning Commission that was absent, and there was one voting no on that ordinance, but it was a majority, or yeah, a majority 5-to-1 approving recommendation of the code to you. And on the massing diagrams that I shared with you at the public hearing, I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are a handful. This is what represents what could be built under the existing code. And I'll specifically point out towards the rear of this diagram, it says building setback. That would be the rear building setback shown at 10 feet. That is the current 10-foot rear setback today under our existing code. These subsequent diagrams that show what could happen under the new code represent a 5-foot rear yard setback. These diagrams were prepared prior to the Planning Commission public hearing where we were recommending a 5-foot rear setback. The Planning Commission recommended keeping the existing 10-foot rear yard setback. So these diagrams weren't changed to reflect that. So we just didn't want to misrepresent that these 5-foot shown in these diagrams weren't what are being proposed with the code is at the public hearing. So just that quick clarification. So I'm just going to go through and briefly summarize the public testimony that you heard at that public hearing. There were 6 people that testified. We had received 2 emails prior to the public hearing, and both of those are included in your packet for tonight. Additionally, after the public hearing, we received 2 follow-up emails. Both of those were from people that had verbally testified at the public hearing, and those are also included in your packet. Generally, all of the public testimony was supportive. There was no opposition to approving the proposal. I don't necessarily need to read through all these, but I can. These are all listed in the board memo. These are all the topics that relate to the public testimony you heard. The majority of these have to do with the middle housing proposal. And those pieces that staff is going to respond to are I'm going to touch on in more detail, but there are a handful that we did not respond to that, as we discussed in the board memo, they were discussed at length through the development of the code with the technical advisory committee. We took input from the public survey as well as through the Planning Commission public hearing process. So the 3 areas that I do want to talk about that we're asking for your specific input on tonight.
Mark, could we go back to
Sure.
could we go back to the simplified redevelopment options for mixed use?
Yep.
Because I don't, based on how this presentation is going, I don't know that you're getting to that as a topic point. I guess one of the things that I wanted to understand is the development community was pretty clear that change was probably critical to what we see as downtown today, and that if we essentially adopted as written, that we were going to dramatically slow down the development in downtown. Is that accurate?
So there's definitely, I would say it's accurate that we recognize there are concerns and issues with how the mixed use development zone downtown is implemented. A lot of that has to resolve around the aesthetics of buildings downtown. Downtown's very specific because we do have design standards for buildings downtown. I would not say it's accurate to say it's going to significantly slow down development downtown. Really, there's not going to be a significant change to the pace of development that we have been experiencing downtown. It's just that we're looking for different creative solutions on how that can happen. The specific request to allow the process of MDS, minimum development standards process, to be allowed in the downtown mixed use zone doesn't work for a number of reasons that we discuss and outline in the memo. It's just functionally, it really wouldn't work to use that as a process downtown.
So how long, if we sort of play this out from a timeline perspective, how long before we would have an alternative, a more simplified version available for downtown redevelopment?
So we are including in the proposal tonight a way to have a more simplified version of site plan review that can be used downtown. As part of the fee ordinance you just adopted, we actually included a brand new fee that we've never had before. It's for a simplified site plan review process that we have built in to the new development code. So that one piece in and of itself is a big step towards evaluating the extent to which redevelopment or new development would happen downtown and being able to identify that simplified process to be used. That is a way to use the appropriate process, but scale it to the level that the proposed development or redevelopment would be occurring.
And has that been reviewed with the public that had that as a concern? Like, is this problem effectively been solved?
I would say it's not been completely solved. There's still work to do. One of the struggles or challenges was the scope of the phase 1 and phase 2. And phase 2 is where this work would more appropriately potentially have been contained. The mixed use development zones were not included in phase 2. They were outside the scope of that work. They were identified as being included in phase 3 of the code update, which still needs to take place. And there are still fixes that can take place to even clean it up further. I'll just mention too, it's a couple fine tuning types of tweaks in the code, and it gets down into some minutia, but even some of the definitions themselves of words and how we interpret those definitions. For the example, the definition of the term development and the definition of the term improvement. Those are two words that we define in our code, and depending on how those are interpreted and applied, it determines what level of change to a structure could take place with or without certain process pieces in place.
Okay, so could we reach back out to the downtown development community, run back through and make sure everybody's good here? Because if we still have an issue, right, I would prefer that we get this fixed, right, instead of slowing down what the development is. Christina?
Mayor, one of the concerns that I raised with Mark and advising him on this is that early on in the process, it was explicitly not part of the scope of this code update to address the downtown or other mixed use areas. That was reserved for phase 3. And so in meetings with the TAC groups, the technical advisory teams and the stakeholder advisory teams, when comments were raised early on in the process about the mixed use or the downtown areas and changes made, we provided the feedback back to those stakeholders that those were really good comments. We want to capture them, but it was outside the scope of phase 1 and phase 2. It's a lot of work needed. As the council may recall, there was extensive work on a downtown design standards project that stalled. And so we essentially didn't capture comments in the stakeholder advisory committee, technical advisory committee that are on this topic. And so my concern about selectively reaching out for input on how to change like the MDS language or making more extensive changes to the mixed use zones at this time would be that we would be engaging on a topic that we much earlier on in this same phase told other interested stakeholders we were not going to engage on at this time. And so I'm concerned about our goal 1 the goal 1 implications of that and our ability to meet our timeline to get phase 1 in place by July 1 if we extend it out to work on those.
In my sense, so I think there's two things. One of these is that I'm not saying that we need to sort of delay adoption for this, right? Because I know we're on a state mandated deadline that is sort of sensitive to it. My concern isn't the scope, the scoping issue. It's the reality that one of the architects was a major player in what we've seen in downtown is saying that currently this code breaks the processes which got us that far. And when I'm listening to the staff report and then listening to the response, I am not sure that we fixed and addressed the issue, even though it may be sort of tangential to what phase 1 has been. And why I want you guys to go back out and talk to them is you guys may have fixed it. If you fixed it, we're all good here. If we've broken something that we shouldn't have, then we need to come back and maybe prioritize trying to address or some sort of temporary fix that would allow you guys to keep working through this as you got into phase 2.
Okay. What I can say is that part of what the architect's comment was perceiving as being broken was simply guidance to follow what is adopted in the code, where prior development staff had ignored applications that should have been required and didn't enforce the code as written for some projects, but not others. And so the part of the architect's perspective, I think, was a change that individual personally experienced in not having the code applied to one project earlier on, and then having another project come forward and say, well, actually, you do have to comply with the code when you're doing work downtown. But I would say that was maybe I don't want to say unfair advantage, but I do want to say it was maybe a unique circumstance that individual experienced. And we also have another one thing that Mark and I do plan to work on that will go to the Planning Commission, and Mark can talk more about this, is a formal interpretation of some of the terms that have been unclear or might have been interpreted differently, so that we can be clear about where in the existing code there is flexibility to make the types of improvements to frontages that there's some specific concern about without rising to the level of requiring site plan review, or if it does require site plan review, like Mark said, that streamlined and less expensive site plan option.
Okay, Councilor Pictionary.
Thank you, Sean. Hey, I was just wondering if you had received, I'm not, Mark, actually, if you have received the document from Better Housing Together dated on the 25th. Was that part of the record? So they had a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 recommendations, or their input with recommendations and the reasoning behind that. Did you see that document?
So Councilor Pictionary, thank you for the question. I do believe it's actually in your packet tonight 2 different times. It's in attachments 3. It was an attachment attached to both Dylan Lamar's written follow-up testimony, as well as Karen Knutsen's follow-up email testimony. So that list of their requests and recommendations were built into our packet for tonight and responses.
Okay, yeah, so I try to read all of it, but there's 876 pages in tonight's packet. And my links actually on from the website, that the hyperlinks to the different parts of the documents or attachments are not functioning. So
probably page 872. It's at the very end of that large packet.
Of course it is.
You were right on 872.
Okay.
Joe, do you have?
I'm looking at 872. Yeah, and, that's by the PDF number, PDF page 872. So is there, and that has to do with deadly force. So I'm sure I'm not looking in the right spot.
I'm sorry, what was it in regard to?
It's that the PDF document, page 872, is pertaining to deadly force.
Oh, I'm sorry. So you're looking at the packet for the entire meeting tonight, not just this item.
Correct. Because my link isn't working. So
My apologies for that.
it's not your fault.
I could pull up and share on the screen that attachment from the packet tonight, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I'm still digging. So that would, if you have it right, it's right there.
855.
855 of the PDF.
Yes.
There it is. You're right on the money. And mine's 854. So, but 854 and 855. Okay. That's all I needed to make sure. I wanted to make sure that had an opportunity to be reviewed and vetted. And okay. Thank you. That's all I needed. I appreciate it.
I could just touch on that comprehensive list of items. Those I include in this list that are on this PowerPoint slide. And it's really 3 of those items that we're asking you to weigh in tonight on. In the board memo, we referenced that a number of those topics were discussed at length, like I mentioned, through both the technical advisory committee phase, the public outreach phase, as well as the public hearing phase with the planning commission. A lot of the discussion had to do with whether we go with the state minimum standards, do really just land on where we have to do things as mandated by the state, or do we go above and beyond? You'll recall likely that the planning commission included a supplemental recommendation to the city council as well of a package of additional items they would like for further consideration as we move forward. Really, this is establishing a baseline that then we can build off of for how to encourage and incentivize middle housing in certain areas that we can fine tune at a later time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I see that, like, specifically the ADU definition, minimum lot sizes, setbacks, and lot coverage seems like it's coming right out of that document.
Yeah. So Mark, you're going to take us through a series of the questions you need us to weigh in on.
That's
right?
correct.
Okay.
And I can do that.
Thank you.
Do you have anything, Leonard, before we get into those questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to know, the planning commissioner who opposed this ordinance, did he or she specify what their objections were?
I don't think they specified in writing. They made a number of comments through the public hearing process. I think one of the concerns was around removal of the solar setback standards. I know was one of their issues. They included in the public hearing package were the position papers. They were titled, I think there were 4 of them. They were from Commissioner Quavula. And those 4 position papers laid out his thoughts about what he would have liked to see done different.
I guess what I'm getting at here is I just like to get some sort of sense of how this ordinance exceeds the state mandate. It doesn't sound like it exceeds it in any really great or significant way. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. There are a couple of small areas that I could explain that where we do exceed and provide a little more flexibility than is allowed by state law.
Thank you.
Yeah, why don't we put a pin in that part and let's get through the questions that we've got to get addressed so that we can, and then we can get into broader discussion. We've gotten everybody completely off track already.
I'm fine. And so the first one is, it does get kind of nuanced, and this is an area that it came up as a conflict. We didn't necessarily try and be out of compliance with the state minimum standards, but it's really in how we defined what an accessory dwelling unit is and where they're allowed. So really it boils down to the question of, should we be allowing accessory dwelling units with all the middle housing types? So for instance, if you do a 4-plex and we allow 4-plexes to be detached, so there could be 4 detached units on one lot, should then each one of those detached units also be allowed to have an accessory dwelling unit, effectively making 8 units on that one lot? It then transfers to townhomes, which are by definition attached units, each one of them on their own lot already. And then the cottage cluster type development is another area where you could say you have to do at least a minimum of 4 cottages to be a cottage cluster. But then if you could do an ADU with each one of those cottages, then you end up with 8 units instead of just the 4. I would say the primary difference is parking. So for ADUs, we cannot require additional parking. So for instance, I'll use the cottage cluster example. If you build a 4 cottage development, you have 4 parking spaces. If you now add 4 ADUs for a total of 8 units, you still can only have those 4 parking spaces. We cannot require more. They could choose to develop more parking, but we could not require it.
Leonard.
So these ADUs that are proposed here, they would still be subject to the setbacks that are mandated.
They would. Correct.
Okay, in that case, I'm fine with them.
Corey.
I'm supportive of including them in all the ways.
Marilee.
Yes, I'm saying yes to option 1.
Joe.
I have a lot of trepidation when it comes to the parking issues when we are basically allowing double the amount of dwellings on a single property and only allowing half, or I should say only requiring half of the parking that would normally be associated. And there we go again, we are pushing parking out onto the street because I know developers are not going to be excited to just put a parking unit or parking spot for each unit. If they can get away with not putting parking on a place, then they won't. And so here we go, we're going to push 4 vehicles out on the street. And tonight we just took 50% of the parking off of Mill Street. So where's the happy medium? We are codifying less parking on private property, or for that matter, 4plexes and I assume even apartment buildings, and then pushing parking out on the street where we're now limiting parking on the street. So what are people supposed to do when they have vehicles and you have a family that has 2 vehicles because they both work? And you see where I'm going? I'm very concerned about us pushing parking out on the street when street parking is getting more and more scarce. So, I understand it's the support from counselors, but I don't know if that's being considered, or maybe it's just me that's thinking about the parking and the people are going to try to find a place to park so they can live there.
Steve.
Welcome to the future. That's the intent, is to discourage use of cars in the future. So slowly and gradually, that's what's going to be happening.
As long as we allow it.
I think we're going to be mandated to do that eventually.
Yeah. Corey.
Yeah, we don't require parking for ADUs now, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so it's not a change. It's just the idea is that if there's, I hear what Councilor Pictionary is saying, and also we already have said that we're not going to require additional parking for an ADU.
We're actually prevented by state law from requiring
Okay.
for ADUs.
So I think the question is being driven by the fact that if you do it with a 4plex, you can sort of change a 4plex into a new 8plex, right? Effectively with 4 ADUs. And then because we can't require parking, you're essentially doubling the size. And then, half those units you can't have parking for. If it was the townhomes, not as concerned from my perspective, I'm not as concerned about the duplexes, right? Like not as concerned about. I think it's that 4plex question that I'm having a hard time, getting my head around. Okay, how does that actually work?
And so option 3 is kind of a hybrid where when we specify that it's when the dwelling units are on their own lots, that it would be allowed for the townhomes and the cottage cluster types if they did a land division to divide those cottages onto their own lots. Now, the land division process itself is oftentimes cost prohibitive for people to go through to create units on their own lots that then could be sold off. So there's some disparity between what might be rental units versus individual units on their own lot that could potentially be sold separately. So there's lots of things at play there.
All right. Are there any more thoughts, or are people pretty sort of set that they want to just deal with the ADU thing like we've historically dealt with ADUs? Okay, I'm seeing nods from Corey.
In the big picture, I want to encourage separate lots because we're encouraging home ownership. So to get a loan on a house, you're going to have property lines. It's got to be separate.
And I'll just mention that part of the state law is now the middle housing land division that is included in this code. It's an expedited land division process. So you could take a fourplex that are 4 detached units or 4 even attached units and divide that fourplex so each unit is on its own lot and sell them off separately.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're talking about, is the sort of many different combinations this takes us down. And what does it mean? I guess my ask would be the first time we get a fourplex with 4 ADUs, right? Like, and obviously process the, permitting and the planning documents like you're supposed to, but I would love to get to just see that, to try to get my head around, well, what does that even mean, right?
Yeah.
Leonard, did you have something else?
Well, I'm just to clear it up in my mind, are we talking about option 1 or option 3 right now?
Well, I'm seeing everybody say that they effectively want option 1, which is no additional change.
That's my preference.
So I would envision incorporating these option numbers into the motion in 3 different places. And then obviously at your discretion, you can discuss that or vote it up or down or however you see fit there. But
okay,
we can move forward through the 2 other questions and then see where we're at the end. So the second question is in regard to setbacks. You heard some specific testimony on setbacks, both from Dylan Lamar and Karen Knutson in that sheet that Councilor Pictionary referenced. They provided after the hearing. It's in the packet, as well as another email that commented on the accessory structure setback. So there's really kind of 2 pieces to this question. The first is, should we stay with a 10-foot rear yard setback? And that's what's in the code today. It's what's in the proposed code. Or should we reduce that to 5 feet? And that would be a change to the proposed code. So that's the first piece. That's what we originally proposed to the Planning Commission in the public hearing process. And then they recommended it stay at 10. The second piece of the question is specifically to accessory structures. Today, accessory structures are typically like a garden shed and detached structures. Those are allowed to be a 3-foot setback, which is the minimum under fire code. And so it was a little bit of an oversight, but in cleaning up the code and simplifying it, those 3-foot setbacks are gone. And so there's at least some testimony arguing that 3-foot setback provision for accessory structures should be put back in.
Marilee.
Thanks. I am in favor of the 10-foot setback and the 3 feet for accessory structures. One of the first things I thought of, which you just mentioned, was a concern for fire and emergency response. And I've lived in cities. I've lived in Philadelphia. And the closer we get to minimizing this, is the closer we get to looking like a concrete city. We've got. I'm all for having as much possible as we can make in the design and creativity to make as many affordable structures as we can get. But I also want them to be attractive and desirable. And I don't know too many people who just want to reach their arm out and shake hands with the next door neighbor. So I just think that there needs to be some room for people for ownership, to attract ownership and to attract a desire to want to purchase and be part of the home ownership and in affordable housing. So I'm in favor of the 10-foot and adding the 3 feet back in for accessories for safety reasons.
And if I could just clarify, you could choose either option 1 or 2 and option 3 or not 3. They're not all mutually exclusive there.
Right, and I'm for option 1 and 3.
Right.
Yep. Okay. Joe?
I think it makes sense to bring back the 3-foot setback for accessory structures. I do think that, and to be a little bit, normally Marilee and I, align each other pretty quick, quite often, but in this particular case, if we've only got a 5-foot setback on the sides, I don't know the difference between a 5-foot setback on the side of the structure versus a 5-foot setback on the back of the structure. Fact is, you got structures on each side that can be, a minimum of 10 feet apart. And in the back, it would be the same way, minimum of 10 feet apart. Although I think I would agree with the recommendation from earlier in regards to the, a 5-foot setback in the rear when it comes to with a footprint of a 900 square foot structure or the definition of an ADU. So it allows for more ADUs and minimizes the full-on house that far back like Marilee is talking about. But for an ADU, I think we should be able to let them get to a 5-foot setback in the rear. So it's a modified 2 and 3.
Leonard?
Well, I was for option 1 and 3 until Marilee brought up shaking hands with your neighbor. I think we should be encouraging that behavior. So I think I'm actually for option 2 and option 3.
Okay, so let's take Corey.
I was going back and forth because I think, there's this idea of staying with the 10. Then as I think about it, and not to sound like a capitalist, but I think also the market is going to play out a little bit, like you said, with the 4 and 4, like we'll see if we do that and nobody likes it. So I also definitely think we should bring the 3-foot back so that we can have some structure around structures. But I'm open to the 5-foot.
Okay, so I'm hearing 3-foot, definitely yes. And then I'm hearing 5-foot, option 2. Joe?
Yeah, I just want to clarify that the 5-foot, if it's not limited to smaller structures like the small footprint structures like the ADUs or the 950 square foot structures, then if that's not the case, then I support option 1.
Okay, so I think there's 2 points we got to talk through, right? So are you for option 1, option 2, or sort of the middle part, the hybrid between the two, which is 10 if it's a normal size house, and then if it's an ADU, having it be 5.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yep.
Yeah. So I think we still haven't settled on that question.
I'd go with 1 and 3, but I'm going to tell you, I don't know what we're going to do when we make the motion. So somebody keep track of them.
We'll get it figured out when we get that way. So we're good on 3, right? But we're still kind of all over the place. We got Corey and Leonard saying, hey, option 2. We've got Marilee and Steve saying option 1, and then Joe's saying 1.5 for me.
I like 1.5.
Okay.
I'm good with the 10 feet and then the 5 feet if you have ADUs.
Yeah, this isn't the hill I'm going to die on. That's fine.
Okay. So, Clark, does that make sense to you?
It does.
All right. So then,
Take it 5 feet by 5 feet by 5 feet.
Anybody want to throw in another scenario for us to track? All right.
So I'll move on to the third question, and this ties in a little bit back to it is the parking question, ties into some of the conversation you were having a few minutes ago. And you heard some of this testimony, not necessarily directly, but Dylan Lamar has talked about a number of different development type scenarios to make affordable housing easier to develop. staff has looked at a lot of those options and really identified a parking reduction for affordable housing would be a way to facilitate more flexibility for a site to allow affordable housing. As you're all probably aware of, his C Street co-op type development, smaller units hopefully equal more affordability, but it is the guaranteed affordable housing type projects that this would be applicable to. So really the question is, should we put back in? So we had proposed a parking reduction at the Planning Commission public hearing. I think, I don't want to speak for them, but in their supplemental recommendation, they weren't against the parking reduction. They just wanted to consider it as part of a larger package of incentives. But it is something that could be put back in a standalone to provide that incentive now, while a bigger package of incentives was looked at later. But so really that's the question.
Leonard.
So I got a question here. So when we talk about a parking reduction, are we talking about a mandated parking reduction, or a reduction in the required amount?
Reduction in the required amount. So they could choose to still develop how much of a parking they would want under the code. But they would be allowed to go lower, down to half the required.
Well, that being the case, I'm in favor.
You're in favor
of the reduction in the mandated amount.
Merrily.
Required amount.
As that has been explained, as long as they're not required to reduce it by 50%, but they can go to 50% by choice in their development, I'm okay. One of the comments that was made in regards to lowering the requirement or lowering the parking was in regards to being access to transit, to all that kind of stuff, biking and all that kind of stuff. And I wanted to remind, as I've reminded Representative Lively so often, there aren't always access, or people don't always have the ability to even get from where they're living to a transit if they are disabled in any way or restricted in any way. So when you're talking about putting somebody who's in a position, in a housing situation, on a fixed income, or for whatever other reasons, that's something to consider when you're talking about creating parking. Sometimes that's the only way that somebody has access even to get from their house to taking an opportunity to use transit or something like that. And so I think that it's important to consider that those kind of needs are out there, especially if you're talking creating affordable housing and creating it exactly for the people that need it the most. So just adding those 2 cents in, but as long as they're not required to cut it by 50%, and they can make the choice to do that. But like I said, I just want them, whoever made that comment in their packet material, want them to think about that and remember that there's people out there that may be a block away from transit, but they may not have quite the capability of even being able to get from their house to that transit, and having a parking space is much more amenable to them.
Joe.
Thank you. And that's true, Mary Lee, for sure. Coming back to parking now, I think nobody would disagree with me when it comes to from the eyes of a developer. If a developer looks at a piece of property, they're going to want to maximize development within those boundaries of the property. And if they could get away with not having any parking, then I would venture to say that many developers would do that and just simply park out on the street. So that being said, and then we turn around and say, well, reduce that requirement by 50% for long-term affordable housing. And I'm thinking, okay, so affordable housing is indicative of a lower income family. And so those families need to work. And more often than not, quite often, they are not working in transportation hubs. They're out in the industrial community and out in the field where public transportation is not even available. So those folks need to have some sort of vehicle to get to where they're working. But yet now we're turning around and telling long-term affordable housing, you're going to have less parking. So here it runs against what we are doing with the state laws saying, okay, infill, fill it up with buildings, fill it up with houses. I get it. But here we are getting, I think we got our binders on and not allowing us to look at who's living there and what their actual needs are. And these people got to have transportation. And I agree, it'd be great if everybody bicycled off the, as much as they want, but that's not going to be your average worker. They're not going to be riding their bicycle around in a pouring rain, just trying to get to work when public transportation doesn't get them there. So I'm very perplexed about this mad push to reduce parking or allow it if they want to do it. But we also know in that same breath, we know that developers are not going to want to do more parking. So in a way, it's kind of a misnomer. So I think that, frankly, I don't think we should mess with the parking except for do what the state mandates us to do. But we got to have parking for our working class folks.
Corey.
So yet again, I actually agree with Councilor Pishneri for lots of reasons. And I've been thinking about this. Councilor Pitts isn't here to just talk about the visitability challenges of minimal parking. And I think that Councilor Woodrow touched on this, but one of the things is, not everyone is what's considered able-bodied. And so reduction in parking means reduction in all parking. That means reduction in accessible parking for someone who may have a mobility device and need to get into an affordable housing unit. So I think that we've leaned so far over that we aren't really considering the realities. And I recently read an article about the sort of myth of food deserts, and the idea is that, most people do have access to transportation, whether it's their own or someone else. If they're an older person, someone is driving them places. And if you were coming to pick up your senior person who lives in an affordable housing unit and you can't get the house close enough to get them in their mobility device into the car. I mean, all of these things are real. And I think that the idea that affordable would mean less access is problematic for me. So I am for option one. And the other piece that I think we've talked about here is I also completely understand that these mandates are coming down from the state, and they also are sort of being tested out in much more compact urban areas. And so to take these rules and regulations that are meant for a Portland or a Beaverton or wherever and slap them onto Springfield, Oregon is also, I feel resistant to that. So I'm not quite ready to go there until they make us. So I'm for option one.
Marilee. You're on mute, Marilee.
Me too. I had option one written down before Mark explained option two. But after listening to both the Councilor Pishneri and Councilor Rodley, I am right back where I was originally with option one.
Okay. What's the next question, Mark?
That's all the questions I have. I'm happy to.
I need to, sorry. Can we go back to the first option? I did some, and I apologize for this. We did some additional research on the way that the ADU question was framed, and I want to make sure it's represented accurately in the code with what the code was. So if we can go back to those slides, Mark, it would be helpful.
On which slides?
First question. So I just want to be clear that it's whether ADUs should be allowed as part of cottage cluster development or townhomes. There was some discussion that about ADUs and fourplexes or triplexes. The current code does not propose to allow ADUs with fourplexes or triplexes. And so I just want to be clear that fourplexes and triplexes are different than cottage cluster development or townhomes. And then also just be clear that with the only place where an ADU is currently allowed is with a single unit detached dwelling. And so any of these options would be adding new ADUs. So I don't know if that means the council needs to rediscuss the direction you provided or whether that clarification was already what the council understood. But I just want to be really clear on the record about what is in the proposal in terms of those plexes.
Joe?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Christina, because I was biting my lip during most of that process. When it's asking for a definition, well, I'm getting confused because it says the definition of a dwelling unit, accessory dwelling unit. And in my mind or in my head, it was a building that was detached or attached that was 850 square feet.
800.
800. Okay, so it calls out the square footage, and then this addition, Mark, if correct me if I'm wrong, is you're saying that we can now throw ADUs on a lot that's got a fourplex, and that very same fourplex will have a lot that's down to 7,000 square feet. And so then we're talking about the maximum amount of overlay on a lot that's 7,000 square feet. What kind of square footage you're talking with a fourplex, and those ADUs will count towards that, correct?
Councilor Pishner, when you mentioned the overlay, are you referencing the amount of lot coverage that structures?
Yeah.
That
So
would,
I mean, because we're adding more buildings, so therefore it's got to impact the overlay, correct?
We would not. Oh,
just
go
to be
ahead.
clear, yeah, just to be clear, Christina was pointing out my oversight that the additional ADUs would not be allowed for fourplexes and triplexes. It's just specific to townhomes and cottage clusters.
Okay.
But you're still correct in if we were talking about 4 cottage clusters on a site, that you could add 4 ADUs, 1 for each of those 4 cottage clusters, and that would all count towards the lot coverage.
So when we have, for example, you're talking about the maximum lot coverage right now is recommended to be 45% of the max of the lot. Is that correct?
That's correct.
When in the ADUs will count towards that.
That's also correct.
So so if you add up, I'm in my head, I'm going, okay, 850 or 800 times 4, and you're looking at a townhome that's what, 1,000 square feet?
Yeah, and it's a valid point that you're not always going to be able to do the ADUs. And I'll just point out one potential option for an ADU is somebody could convert an interior part of a structure to an ADU. For instance, a garage could become an ADU, and that would already be part of the existing structure. It doesn't mean every lot's going to be able to do an ADU because you have to meet all these other development standards. It's just providing more flexibility.
Right. I can't align myself to destroy and to absolutely remove open space for where people are living. Merely hit it on the button earlier. So talking about a concrete jungle. Well, here we are, we're looking at codes that theoretically, if you add up all those square footages of those structures, won't even fit most of our lots, a lot of our lots, and yet it's not going to allow for any open space in our neighborhoods. So frankly, I don't like any of that. So
Leonard,
is there a minimum size for an ADU?
There's no minimum in the development code. I think through building code provisions, it would mandate about a minimum size of any dwelling is around 200 square feet. Could be a minimum dwelling size period, but not specific to ADU.
So you could scale your ADU to the available space. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
okay, so it sounds like we're still on option 1 for folks. Okay, so Mark,
Sorry, real quick. I just want to be clear. That is option 1 with the understanding that it is allowed with attached and detached housing types being cottage townhomes and cottage clusters, not the fourplex and triplex. You could add fourplexes and triplexes if you wish to. I'm not hearing that. I just want to be really clear. That's what that we're in agreement about. That's what option 1 means.
and Mark, now we got to form this into a motion, right? And the way that I read the packet is on the first question, we selected option 1, which was no change. And then option 3, which was no change. So the only change we would have to put in there is option 2, right?
And I'll look at Christina potentially. Does that sound correct, Christina? Would they need to include those?
I am just going, and I apologize, I'm trying to find my place for the motion in the PDF. And so the scrolling is setting me a little behind because I have to jump around.
Well, why don't you, Joe's got a comment, so why don't you take a second and get ready to help us with the motion, because it's going to get complicated here, and
Absolutely.
we'll let Joe make a comment.
Thanks, Sean. I clearly understand, Christina, that this does not apply to fourplexes, and I would be opposed to applying it towards fourplexes. So I'm fine with that. That makes sense. Even triplexes don't make any sense to put ADUs on it.
All right, so.
And I was just going to say, I'd entertain any questions or discussion about any other topics. Those are the only ones I was going to cover tonight.
Are there any other questions about the code? All right, Joe.
All right, got a lot of them tonight. It's a hot topic. So
it's a big one.
It is. I want to make sure we cross our T's. And Mark, by the way, you're doing an exceptional job. So just so you know that I've always supported your work. So I do want to know if there's been serious consideration when it comes to the percentage of maximum lot coverage. So, and free space to me is huge. And kids need to have a place where they can even play between two buildings. And if we're reducing our maximum lot coverage down to only 45% of a lot, right? So what was it before?
Actually, and maybe Christina can fact check me on this. I don't have the existing development code in front of me, but we're proposing to keep the lot coverage standard the same as it is today.
Okay.
And we had proposed a new different scheme for lot coverage. And so currently lot coverage counts structures or buildings as defined. It does not include impervious surface areas like pavement and driveways, paved patios, things like that. So it would only count structures on a lot. What we had proposed is raising the number up to 60%, but including all impervious surface areas of the property. It would be much more difficult to enforce.
Interesting. Yeah, that'd be very interesting. Yeah.
People can pave a back patio and not get a building permit, and we would never know it's there, kind of thing.
So does your number, sorry to interject, does your number also include the quote unquote accessory buildings?
It would, yes, any structure. But so where this was discussed at length at the Planning Commission hearing, and there was a lot of back and forth, really where they landed on is keeping it what it is today. We envision this topic needing to change over time because of the new stormwater permit being implemented over the next year or two.
Right.
And so really, it's ultimately going to boil down to how much area of your property is developable is going to depend on how much of the stormwater needs to be captured and dealt with on site. So really, that's going to end up being the driving factor behind lot coverage. So with the Planning Commission's recommendation, and we agree, is leave well enough alone for now, and let's see how the new MS4 permit for stormwater plays out.
That's under the new NEPA's direction from DEQ. Yep.
Right.
So they're also into the future, so we don't box ourselves in now. So into the future, that is also quantified by a percentage of impervious surface, and then they calculate, or you have to calculate pervious surface. And the difference between the two is where you're going to try to now mandate some on-site catchment facilities on top of all this infill buildings that we're now within 5 feet of our property.
That's correct.
Well, good luck. Thanks.
All right, Christina.
So
Are you ready to talk motions?
Yes. So am I correct that the only change you're wanting to make is option 1 on the topic of accessory dwelling units? Is that capturing the discussion?
We want option 1 on the accessory dwelling units, and then we want, so here's what we want for the conversation about setbacks. We want a 10-foot setback for regular buildings, 5-foot setback for ADUs, and 3-foot setback for sort of those outbuildings.
Okay,
That's exactly what I got, Sean.
And the way I read the packet for option 1 is for ADUs was actually no change to the current draft code. But I don't know if that makes life easier.
we
or not.
do have to change the draft code to to fix the inconsistency. So it's no change to part of the draft code. It is a change to another section. So we'll want to specify that one. And
Okay.
then on the topic of setbacks, that's basically none of the options specifically in the packet, correct?
Correct.
Well,
Okay,
no, it addresses option 3. Option 3 and then option 2.5 hybrid for
okay,
setbacks.
Yeah, I think that's correct. So we're defining a new setback plus option 3.
okay.
So it might be easier, Sean, or maybe Christina can.
I'm hoping she's typing it
I
out.
am typing right now.
Yeah, we just have to stall for station identification, and I think it's going to put it up there for Steve.
Well, if she puts it on the screen, that way Steve can read straight off the screen.
We're going to leverage technology here.
So retaining a 10-foot setback for primary dwellings in all zones,
Yes.
Correct.
Primary structures, Christina, or
primary structures
Primary structures, yes.
in all residential. I'm going to say in R1, R2, and R3.
Apartments and condominiums are starting to look pretty good now, aren't they?
And it is for accessory dwelling units.
Yes.
Yep.
10-foot setback, that is the 10-foot rear setback, correct?
Correct.
And a 5-foot rear setback for accessory.
Yeah, on ADUs, correct.
Okay, so I think that I have this. I'm going to put this in read mode because it'll be easier for you. And then I will share my screen. And you can review that and maybe if you're ready for the motion, you can do that. Or if you want to read it through and ask me questions first, that might be a better use of time.
I think give people a second to read it because
Please.
yeah.
We need to add the 3-foot back in.
That is option number 3. So on the topic of setbacks, that would be option number 3 written into the packet. And then you would be also adding retaining a 10-foot rear setback for primary structures and 5-foot rear setback for accessory dwelling units.
And you forgot, you need
The
you get
The
that
3-foot for accessory.
accessory buildings.
Yeah.
That is in option number 3.
It
That's
wasn't
listed
3.
there. So
Yeah.
that's already in the packet in option 3. So I'm calling that out on this 4th line here on the topic of setbacks. You're picking option 3, which is that 3-foot setback for accessory structures, plus what comes after that option number 3.
Okay.
So Steve would be good just reading it as is and it'll come out.
Yeah, hang on one second. We got Corey.
Does this include the parking option 1? Was that a no change? Or is that something different? That was our 3rd thing we had to talk about.
I don't think, Christina, I think
Option
that's
number 1 has no changes to the proposed ordinance under this option, so it doesn't need to be captured in your motion, but if you want to be really clear, I could add that. It's not necessary.
No, I think we're good. So does anybody have other questions about the motion before I let Steve sort of read it? I'm seeing, all right, Steve, you are up.
Mr. Rest, are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Do it, Steve.
Okay, I move to adopt the proposed ordinance with the following changes as written in the council briefing memorandum for this item. In the text highlighted in blue. It's hard for me to read that, by the way. With the text highlighted in blue with the minor edits noted. And on the top of accessory dwelling unit definition and standards, adopting the changes in option number 1 on the topic of setbacks, option number 3, retaining 10-foot rear setback for primary structures in R1, R2, and R3, and 5-foot rear setback for accessory dwelling units.
I second that motion.
All right, Neil, could you call the vote, please?
Yes, Counselor Pitts, Counselor Mo,
Yes.
Counselor Rodley,
Yes.
Counselor Stair,
Aye.
Counselor Woodrow,
Yes,
and Counselor Pictionary.
Yes, and thank you.
Motion passes 5 yeses, 0 nos, and 1 absent.
Good job,
Congratulations,
Christina.
Mark, nice
That's
job.
a huge milestone. I appreciate all the work.
You have done a wonderful job on this. I've seen this stuff is in constant change right now, and future, there's a whole lot more change coming.
And now that we adopted it, we'll be back soon to change it. I'm sure.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. And thank you, Christina. Appreciate you.
Yes, thank you.
Next item, please.
Business from the city council.
Any other business? Corey?
I just want to remind everybody to vote. You have until 8 p.m. tomorrow to get your ballots in to, and if you live in Springfield, we've got a couple of boxes. There's one right here at City Hall. And this year, this election, it can also be in the hand of a postal service person tomorrow. So if you can't get to a box, you can still get it and make sure it's in the hand of a postal service person. That's it. Thanks.
Joe?
Thank you, Corey. I appreciate you bringing that up. Also want to remind folks that there's a voter box, receptacle box at Splash Wave Pool off of Thurston Road, and they have a new one out at Rite Aid over off of Marcola, off of that, and it's towards the street over by Albertsons and the Rite Aid. So it's out there too.
All right.
That's a new one.
Anybody else? Next item, please.
Any business from the city manager?
Just really quickly, I wanted to recognize Mark Rust and also Christina Kraz for their excellent work on getting to the development code over the finish line, and also you counselors for taking the time to review many, many pages of code, which is very tedious and time-consuming work, and reminding our community that you are all volunteer elected officials and you give of your time very generously. And I wanted to thank you and our staff in that for that project.
I truly have reviewed the whole code, haven't read it, but a lot of it overlays on some of the old stuff, but it's all new stuff. Yeah.
All right. Next item, please.
Next item is business from the city attorney. One item tonight, amendment to Lane County use of deadly force plan. This is resolution number 3, a resolution approving an amendment to the Lane County Deadly Physical Force Plan as created by the Lane County Deadly Physical Force Planning Authority. And Lieutenant George Crawley is here for the staff report.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, ladies and gentlemen of the council. This plan has been in place since 2008. It's a countywide plan, which is to say it's not specific to the city of Springfield. The deadly force plan by law enforcement personnel obviously is a matter of critical concern both to the public and to the law enforcement community. And the purpose of this plan is not to set the standards for the use of force or to substitute for agency policy regarding use of force, but rather to provide a framework for a consistent response to an officer's use of deadly physical force that treats law enforcement officers fairly and promotes public confidence in the criminal justice system. So what's being submitted is a request for approval of the amended plan. The amended plan is required to be submitted to the supervising body of each jurisdiction within the county that employs a law enforcement agency. By the terms of Senate Bill 111, council must approve or disapprove of the plan as submitted and is not allowed to amend the plan. The amended plan addresses a change mandated by House Bill 4301. And with the passage of that bill, the Interagency Deadly Force Investigation Team, as part of its investigation, will determine, amongst other things, whether the deadly force was objectively reasonable under the totality of the circumstances known to the police officer, and whether there was a reasonable opportunity prior to the use of deadly physical force for the officer to consider alternatives or give a verbal warning that deadly force may be used with time for the person to comply. Other than what I just said, no other changes were made to the deadly physical force plan.
Leonard.
Thanks for your report. Were there in what you just outlined, were there any amendments that are in excess of the House bill? Or is this strictly to comply with the House bill?
It's strictly to comply with the House bill.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Joe,
Thank you. George, was there any part of the, from the 2008 to the 2021 plan? I'd love to see documents where it says, it shows changes, but do you know where, was there any changes? I mean, I understand that there's the bill, et cetera, but does it show anywhere in this document what changes were made so it's easier to review?
Yes, it's actually the very last page of the Deadly Physical Force Plan. It's the heading on the top of the page is titled 2022 Amendment to Deadly Physical Force Plan. That's the only change.
Okay, that's what I was curious about. I didn't know if I had to sit there and read it word for word to pick out what was pulled out and what was added in. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
are there any other questions?
It's my hope that the city will never, ever have to use this. But we're being safe. So I'm gonna make a motion that we adopt resolution number 3.
Second.
Neil, could you call the vote, please?
Yes, Counselor Pitts, Counselor Mo,
Yes.
Counselor Rodley,
Yes.
Counselor Stair,
Aye.
Counselor Woodrow,
Yes,
and Counselor Pictionary.
Yes, thank you.
The motion passes 5 yeses, 0 nos, 1 absent. Are there any other items?
Any other business from the city attorney?
No, no other business. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night. We are adjourned.
good night.
This is your pen.